Welcome to the Hidden Podcast, where we simplify cybersecurity and all things tech for those of you who, like me, need it to be explained without all the jargon. So, if you've ever wondered why you still feel vulnerable even though you've bought all the fancy tools, you've come to the right place. I'm your host, Lynn, and my job is to take one of our resident experts and help them translate their cyber expertise into plain English. This means having practical conversations, usually built around Babbel's hidden cybersecurity framework, which we break down in the show. Or sometimes we'll take a hot topic in the tech industry, like a major breach or a new legislation, and we'll explain how we help you stay ahead. Basically, this podcast exists so that you can sleep well at night, preferably not during the podcast. Joining me in the virtual studio today is Nisha Sondhi. Thanks for joining us, Nisha.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Awesome. So before we dive in, do you mind telling our friends listening or watching out there a little bit about yourself in terms of what you do and where you live?
Sure. So I live in a little town called Sandhurst, half an hour from Windsor. I'm a cybersecurity specialist at Babbel, so supporting the account managers, account directors with their customers when it comes to cybersecurity.
Love that. And I also appreciate the fact that you are a girl in cybersecurity. I like to call you our cybersecurity queen. So that's great,
Okay.
paving the way there. All right. So do you mind telling me a little bit about, what you like most about what you do? I know you're relatively new to the business, but what are you liking the most about it thus far?
I would say it's the people in the organization. Everybody is super helpful, very friendly. Everybody is happy to support where possible. And I think there's some really positive changes that have been implemented recently. I'm seeing a lot of positivity from the organization as well as our clients. So overall, yeah, it's been a great experience so far.
Love that. And it is honestly a pleasure to have you on board, Nisha. Today, we're talking about one of your company's most valuable assets, your data. So, Nisha, let's start with a hard truth. In your experience, do most of the SMBs that you work with actually know where their sensitive data lives today?
It's a really good question. And I think the honest truth is partially they do and partially they don't. I don't think it's tracked the way it could be tracked. And I think most of the organizations within that community, there is room for improvements.
Why do you think they aren't protecting their crown jewels?
I think it's more to do with the oversharing, not really having strict policies in place. So anybody in the organization may have access to certain data that they can easily share. Whether they share that internally or they're sharing that outside their organization, if you speak to most of customers out there, I don't think they have any tools that can even demonstrate that that data is being shared externally, which is why I don't think they really know whether that is being secured properly.
Yeah, that is definitely unfortunate, but I guess that's why we're having these conversations in the first place. So you mentioned oversharing, and that nicely segues into the next question that I have for you. Data sprawl and oversharing are, of course, major contributors to data exposure. So Nisha, what does data sprawl typically look like in a 50 to 200 person business?
So it could typically look like where data is stored either on SharePoint, on a local drive, and you start to lose where the master file is. And what can that cause? Well, it's having that control, it's understanding who has access to it, and more importantly, what are they doing with it? And you get to see this a lot, unfortunately. It's called like a radius blast, where suddenly all that data is just being sent to random individuals. Nobody's actually governing the actual data itself. The policy is probably old, so anybody can access it, and there's just no control. No one has any visibility or control about how it's being handled or managed.
You don't know where that data is going, who has access to it, and also what they're doing with it as well.
Absolutely. And, there are so many tools now where how we can share data, and data can now be shared on Teams. And you can have external individuals on your team's account where you can now share that data. So these are other areas now where we, really should be having those conversations with our customers, educating them in terms of why having better policies wrapping around your data is really vital to your organization, especially when you have the likes of hybrid, multiple applications, it all does bring you to how can we put that ring fence around it?
Yeah, so just going back to this issue of oversharing, even within the business, right? Because I think, the initial take on that is to say, obviously, whatever happens in the business stays in the business, but even having those measured controls within the business in terms of who has access to what is obviously crucial, as you've mentioned. So, why is this oversharing within the business such a silent risk?
So it depends. Oversharing can cause lots of complications. It can impact anything from compliance. Oversharing could be particular types of data. So certain data should not be shared at certain levels. And it's understanding what data you're sharing and who to, which is why it's quite concerning when you see organizations oversharing information. Data might be credit card information. It might be information about a particular project that's being delivered. It might be government information. All these areas come back to having those defined policies in place just to ensure that this data is in the right hands. It has the right access. It's got the right visibility. Equally, oversharing data means you could possibly manipulate that data. So now you start to lose its true form of that data. And that's just as dangerous because now you're sharing data which technically might not be correct and it's being manipulated.
Yeah. And then, depending on how granular the changes are, or how much data you have, and how much of that data has actually been manipulated, it would also be tough to know what that single version of truth is as
Yeah.
well.
It's understanding the
Yeah.
master copy versus what data you're now
hmm
saying. So there's
hmm
lots of, areas of concerns when it comes around oversharing data.
Yeah, I love that you brought up this element of having that master copy as well, because that nicely segues into the next episode, which is about disaster recovery, where Steve and I talk at length about the difference between having a backup and recovery and why it's not the same thing, but why both are very important as well. So be sure to tune in to that episode. But bringing it back here and switching gears to now the compliance and insurance side of things, why are regulators, insurers, and customers becoming more focused on data governance?
So there's many reasons behind that. And, what they're trying to do is they're trying to force businesses now to clean up their digital footprint. They're trying to get them to take that onus. Having insurance is one thing, but then there's also premiums attached to those insurance policies. What they want to do now is to get organizations to be able to demonstrate, yes, we have the right policies in place, or we've done a recent audit or a review. It's now them doing their due diligence on their customers. I think prehistorically it was, yes, here's an insurance document. But as we grow more and more into the world of cybersecurity, there are more and more applications, and now we've got AI into the mix. Now insurance companies understand actually that risk is not siloed. It can spread out quite fast, quite quickly, and the impact can be quite significant to an organization or to an individual.
And would this also have anything to do with the, Danzel version 3.3? Please do correct me if I'm wrong on that, but basically the big changes that happened just this April to Cyber Essentials.
So, when it comes to governance and compliance, there are elements of where organizations have to show due diligence. So, they want MFA now on everything. Anything that's connected to the internet, you've got to demonstrate you've got MFA. When it comes to the world of compliance, and most organizations that take on the Cyber Essentials Plus, they want to get on to the ISO 27001. Now, that readiness is all around, policies, controls, data. This all leads up nicely. So you're absolutely right. It's best housekeeping. That's what they need to be trying to achieve now, is that continuation.
Mm. Okay, so let's talk about unknown sensitive data, data that is very near and dear to the company, but people either don't know that it exists or they don't know where it's sitting. So why is classification so often missing in terms of labeling the data?
I don't think it's an intentional missing in the organization. I think it's more to do with they just don't know how to do it. They're not aware of it, and it's not really spoken about at board level. So speaking with particular customers, when I ask these particular questions, it's not on the agenda. It's not something that's been a concern. And I think that stems from the fact that they haven't seen an incident or they don't know of an incident that's actually happened. So it's the out of mind, out of sight mentality. If I can't see, it must not have happened. And the majority of customers say, I will look into that when something has happened or flagged. And I think that's why we see that quite a lot. Um, but what we want to do is prevent that. We want to make sure that, hey, if something has happened, don't worry. We already have policies in place. It's documented. Let's go and review. Or if they do have policies in place, it should be us telling them, well, when did you last review that policy? Have you tested that policy? And again, the majority of the answers is no, we have never tested it. We've built it out, but we've never tested it in years.
Just going to something that you had said that jumped out at me in terms of, it's not necessarily on their list of priorities, or they don't necessarily have somebody designated to classifying this data, especially amongst smaller businesses that don't have that fully fledged IT team as well. So with that being said, who would you say should own this data classification in the typical SMB environment?
It's a good question. There are multiple people that can own it. So you might have somebody that looks after compliance and governance. They will have an input because when it comes to compliance and audit checks, they need to be involved. You might have a CISO in the organization. They will also have an input in making those policies, determine who has access, where we can share and how we can share. Which is why I go back to the board level meetings. It needs to be discussed at a high level so everybody understands how the process is being defined and why, and how it's being reviewed regularly. So you're going to have quite a few individuals involved. Now, it just depends on the organisation in terms of what kind of roles are they appointed, who looks after what. What I do find is one individual may wear several hats. Some organizations, there is one person running everything, and in other organizations, we might have 1 to 3 people running that.
But that can honestly be a lot to just sit on one person's shoulders. And it reminded me of, a conversation that I had earlier with Anton, I believe in the previous episode, where we were talking about identity management. Because I think when you talk about cybersecurity in general, especially again, in the absence of having this internal IT team, it's difficult to establish clear governance and ownership of various elements. And if you really think about it, again, going back now to the H in hidden, which is human risk, we all have some level of responsibility when it comes to keeping the company data and our own personal data as well, right? And
Absolutely.
keep the company
It's
safe. So,
it's a trust element that we have
mhm.
to have with the people that we work with, but you're absolutely right to bring up human risk. It's one of the main factors in terms of why things go wrong and why we overshare and who we share to. And it's great when an organization trusts their people, but partly that trust has come from just being a little bit not keeping up to date with their housekeeping. And it goes back to, well, if it hasn't happened, why should we look at that? And it's like, well, how would you define if it has happened? What would pop up to show an individual in your organization has sent a large mass of data? Do you have any tools that can show you that? And that's when they start to think and go, actually, we don't have anything in place, so we would not know that straight away. By the time they do find out, the damage is already done. The data's been shared. It's been leaked. It's probably been, manipulated, and now it's in the wrong hands.
Yeah. And that nicely moves on to the next question that I have for you, which is what happens when there is no control over external sharing, especially in terms of the dangers of AI? You don't know where this data is going.
So the longer organizations don't realize that they have overshared, so data's being compromised, the more challenging it is. This would be dwell time. And that just means there's more damage being taken with that data. So the individual that has access to that data, whether it is a malicious intent, they've got more time now to use that data to advantage them and disadvantage the individual or the organization. So it's so important that they do have processes in place to identify whether data has been sent to the wrong individual or overshared. And late discovery, that exposure can really impact the organization, not just the fact that they've given data or lost data, but it's their reputation. They will lose that trust from their suppliers, their consumers. And the impact just keeps continuing. And then you then have to go back and backtrack. So do that forensics to understand, well, where did we go wrong? Why did we not know about this? And why did we give that individual access to X, Y, Z? And then you have to go back, and probably some organizations might need to get a third party to help them with that. Some organizations might be able to deliver that themselves. But again, it's the unknown. Do organizations want to take that risk? I wouldn't want to if I owned my own company.
Oh, yeah, me neither. Definitely not. So, Unisha, in your opinion, of course, why is the whole everyone has access to everything problem so prevalent in SMB environments? Is it mostly that whole element of trust, or is it not having the processes in place, or not having clear data ownership?
I think it's a combination of all. And I truly believe that not everybody needs access to all the data. I work for Babel as an example. And so, we don't have access to data that's highly sensitive, and we don't need it. We honestly don't need that access to that data. So I think it comes down to organizations to, define what people's roles are, responsibilities, and then making sure that those policies are in place that meet with their roles and their standards. It makes life easier when it comes to auditing, when it comes to being regulated, when it comes to getting insurance, and it's taken out the stress if anything was to go wrong. Oversharing, I think, just adds far more complexity.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the previous conversation again, going back to identity management, where we were talking about access controls. How for the most part, a lot of businesses simply just give everybody, you know, the highest level of access just so that they can hit the ground running and they can just focus on work. But then the dangers of that is that malicious actor is able to hack into the receptionist, for example's account, and therefore she has the exact same access, and in this case the access to the data that potentially the CFO of the company has as well. So the ultimate goal, of course, when it comes to data controls is to protect data without slowing the business down by making risk visible, controls automatic, and behavior guided, going back to that human risk element. So Nisha, what does good typically look like in data governance? I appreciate that it might look, different depending on the different companies and the sectors. But yeah, what would you say your non-negotiables for good data governance are?
It's understanding a balance, right? You've got to get that balance right. And so again, it's understanding who needs access to what and when. And then you can start adding those rules and policies in place. Or you can add extra layers. Certain information that might need to be shared, you can have it so it's timed. It only has a particular lifespan to the recipient. So there's so many things you can put into place to give you that assurance and best practice. And I think those are the things that are fundamental to organizations, is moving away from the oversharing because you think everybody's trustworthy and it's easy to manage, is by just having that balance and that collaboration. And equally, that gives you back control. But also, they've got to do their hygiene checks. So checking, reviewing, making sure that that policy is still up to date. Or even, does that person still work here and have the same role? You know, we work for organizations where we want to promote ourselves. We want to do the best in any organization we work for. So people do move roles, they change. And equally, the back end of that is, well, if my role has changed, I'm now working in a different division, have my previous access been revoked? If not, why not? I now need access to these, but now suddenly I've got access to everything. And that's what we see a lot when it comes to speaking to our customers, unfortunately. So it's that balance and that collaboration with your team.
Okay. Great advice. So, speaking of advice, the last question that I have for you is a little bit of a curveball, but I'll ask it anyway. So, Nisha, say you're an SMB owner and the worst has happened. Your most sensitive data has just been shared externally. What is the first thing that you would do in this situation to get things under control?
Every scenario is different. Every scenario is not going to be the same. And every organization will have different ways of how they're set up. But really, I think the best thing to try and do is to try and see whether you can revoke that link where that data has been shared, whether there's a way of doing that. Now, we go back to dwell time. So some organizations don't know straight away. so the damage is already done. Some organizations might be quite intuitive and having alerts to say, oh, a large content file has been sent to XYZ. There are ways that we can revoke things in terms of having a policy in place. It would, maybe try and disable that link immediately if you can. So it's a bit like killing the access to that data. You would then have to then go into, identity. So try and determine what kind of data has been sent. Some organizations label their data. So if they do, they can identify straight away, is that data highly sensitive? And by knowing what you're dealing with, you can then start to understand the severity of the kind of data leak you have in place. Again, it all determines to how every individual and every organization has built their identity posture. Unfortunately, there is no standard kind of breakdown. It's a great question, because I think if you were actually to ask a customer that question, don't think they would even have a process behind them. They won't have anything. I don't think they will have tools to help them try and delete that link. I don't think they even do data labeling. When it comes to things like this, and an organization has understood that data has been exploited, there should be a review after that. So they have to do an audit log. They need to understand what has happened within that digital footprint. So assess, did anyone actually click on that link? So has anyone actually accessed that data, or is that link still, where it is it still alive? There's so many things that an organization can and should be doing. But equally, it's by educating them to build out that process. And it goes in nicely with the conversation you had with Steve around disaster recovery. Is how do you try to recover from this? Do you have a plan in place? And if you do have a plan in place, that's absolutely fine. But when did you last test it? So there's quite a few things we can do. If it's absolutely, horrendous and it's a massive impact to the organization, I think my last resort would be kill the switch everything off, and, let's go and get this in and let's have a conversation about what we can do to try and recover that business.
Yeah. I mean, that was definitely great advice. And I think you answered that beautifully, because if I was an SMB owner in that situation, you have definitely given some solid advice there in terms of what the logical first step should be. Because obviously, when you're dealing something as dire as a data breach, you're making emotional decisions. It is really stressful, to say the least, as well. So this is helping calm minds prevail, as they say. So
It
I think
is.
that was great.
And it is scary to think about, that question. But however, it's also preventative, because if an organization ever has this particular situation, lessons should be learned, and then organizations can then start putting prevention in place. And it's going back to what we've discussed, really, putting that ring fence around your most critical data. Naming your data. Is it sensitive? If it's sensitive, have further restrictions in place. So when somebody's accidentally trying to, tag that into a documentation to send out to somebody, it will notify somebody to say, this individual wants to send this out. Actually, that individual can't. They don't have access to it. So suddenly now you've got this lovely process in place. And they might need to, request for access to that data. So as much as it's kind of a scary question, it's actually a question to really help with prevention. So,
Oh, yeah. And I couldn't agree more, because, I bring this up often enough whenever we talk about cybersecurity, that, I mean, the truth of the matter is it's pretty difficult to strike a balance between the doom and gloom of it all, but also still be solution oriented, which of course we are as well. So we're flagging very, prevalent instances, and I'm sure you have dealt with more than a few businesses that have gone through this exact situation. So that was definitely helpful. Is there anything else, though, that you would add? I know we can talk and talk and talk about this, and we will definitely have more episodes to come. But for now, do you think we've covered our bases? Is there anything else that you would add?
no, I think it's been a great conversation. And look, to be honest, you're absolutely right. We could go really deep into this. But again, it's the deeper dive conversations come into when we're having those conversations with the customer, so we understand a bit more about their environment. You made some really good points about cyber insurance compliance. brand reputation. All these things are key when it comes to an organization. So I think you've touched on the relevant points. And I think, the whole purpose of our conversation is to show, our clients, our people that, data is critical to our business in multiple ways. So no, I think it's been a great discussion. So thank you so much.
Awesome. All right, Nisha, with that being said, thank you so, so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to have
Thank
you.
you so much. It's been absolutely, it's been great. It's interesting. And I think you're doing a great job. So thank you so much.
Aw, appreciate it. Day made as usual. Until we meet again, take care.
Take care. Goodbye.
That's a wrap on today's episode of The Hidden Podcast. If this episode gave you an aha moment that helped you untangle something that's been bugging you, subscribe and share it with a friend who's in the same boat. And if you're wondering where you stand across the 6 hidden layers, try our cybersecurity snapshot in the description below. It's a lot less painful than a breach. Until next time, don't let your risks stay hidden.